The great hall of the kingdom was filled with music, light, and whispers. It was the wedding evening of Queen Eleanor, a night that many had been waiting for. The queen was known for her strength, her wisdom, and her ability to rule without fear. She was not only beautiful, but also powerful, and her wedding was not like any other. It was a tradition that her chosen man must face the test of the evening, a trial so hard that no one had ever passed it. Many noblemen had tried in the past, but all of them had failed before the night was over. This evening was no different in the eyes of the court. They expected another man to fall. The nobles and guests filled the hall, dressed in shining clothes, their voices low as they watched the queen sit on her golden seat. She looked calm, her eyes sharp, her face showing no sign of fear or doubt. Everyone wondered who would dare to stand before her this time. Among the guests stood Daniel, a soldier who was not from a great house, who was not rich nor was he famous. His clothes were simple compared to the lords and princes around him. He had no jewels, no crown, and no proud banners. He was only known for his honesty and his courage in battles fought far away. Few believed he was worthy to stand before the queen. Some even laughed at him, whispering that he would not last an hour. But Daniel stood quietly, his eyes steady, his heart calm. When the queen rose, silence spread through the hall. Her voice was clear and strong as she called Daniel forward. The crowd shifted, curious to see how this man would face the impossible trial. Daniel walked to her with slow steps, each one echoing on the stone floor. He did not bow too deeply, nor did he tremble. He simply stood before her, meeting her gaze with quiet respect. The queen studied him with eyes that had broken stronger men. She asked him the first question, her voice sharp like a blade. It was not a question of war or wealth, but of truth. She wanted to know who he was when no one watched, what he valued when everything could be taken away. Many men before him had given answers full of pride, but pride had always betrayed them. Daniel answered simply. He spoke of loyalty, of hard work, of the strength that came from honesty. His words were not grand, but they carried a weight that made the hall fall silent. The queen leaned back, surprised though she did not show it. The nobles whispered among themselves, wondering if this soldier had prepared himself for her test. But there was no sign of clever tricks in his tone. He spoke as if he had nothing to lose and nothing to hide. The evening continued with more questions, each harder than the last. The queen asked about loyalty, sacrifice, and the burden of carrying the lives of many. She asked what he would do when power was in his hands, what he would give up for love, and how he would face the shadow of death. Daniel answered each one with the same calm voice. He did not try to impress her with fancy words. He did not kneel in fear or shout in pride. He simply told the truth, as if truth itself was his shield. Hours passed, and still he did not fall. Sweat covered his brow, but his eyes stayed strong. The queen, who had watched men break with tears and cries, began to feel something she had not felt before. She felt a spark of respect. She felt that this man was different, that his strength was not born from titles or wealth, but from the quiet fire inside him. The hall grew restless as the evening deepened. The nobles wanted to see him fail. They whispered that no one could stand till dawn. Yet Daniel remained, a soldier with no crown, holding himself tall against the weight of the queen's trial. For the first time, Queen Eleanor looked at him not as another suitor to be broken, but as a man who might endure where others had fallen. She did not smile, but in her heart she wondered if this night would be different. The test had only begun, yet Daniel stood unbroken, and the story of this evening was far from over. The evening moved forward, and the hall glowed with golden lamps as the trial of Queen Eleanor continued. Every eye in the room stayed fixed on Daniel, the soldier who had stepped forward when so many had doubted him. The nobles whispered again and again, waiting for the moment when his strength would break. They believed the weight of tradition was stronger than any single man, but Daniel stood firm. The queen rose from her golden seat and walked slowly around him. Her steps were steady, her gaze unblinking. She began to set the next part of the trial. It was not only questions now, but tasks that tested the mind and spirit. A servant brought forward heavy chains made of iron. They were not meant to bind his hands, but to weigh on his shoulders. The chains were laid across him, each link cold and heavy, as a symbol of responsibility that a man must carry if he wished to stand beside a queen. Daniel accepted the weight without a word. His arms strained, his chest rose and fell with the effort, but he did not bend or fall. His silence spoke louder than any speech could. The crowd murmured, and some even began to watch with respect, though many still expected his collapse. The queen then asked him to solve riddles of loyalty, ancient words passed down through generations. These riddles were designed to confuse, to test the heart as much as the mind. Daniel listened to each question carefully, his eyes calm, his voice steady. He did not rush to answer, nor did he try to sound clever. His replies were simple but true, and each one carried a weight that silenced the hall. Even when his answers were not perfect, they showed his honesty and his unwillingness to pretend. The night grew colder as the hours stretched on. Musicians played soft notes in the background, their music meant to unsettle him, to remind him of how long the trial could last. Still, Daniel did not falter. He stood under the chains, his shoulders shaking, but never giving in. The queen, watching closely, felt something stir inside her. She had seen men with titles fall to their knees in fear. She had seen warriors tremble under her gaze. And she had seen princes beg for mercy when faced with the riddles of truth. But Daniel was different. He was not proud, yet he was not weak. He carried the weight as if he had been carrying burdens all his life. The nobles grew restless. Some mocked him in whispers, saying that his end was near. Others began to wonder if he could truly last through the night. One old lord leaned toward his companion and muttered that perhaps the queen herself had met her match. These words spread through the hall like fire, and soon everyone's eyes turned not only to Daniel, but also to Eleanor. The queen did not let her thoughts show, but inside she began to question her own certainty. Was this trial really unbreakable? Was this man standing before her with more than just strength of body? She watched him with care, waiting for even the smallest sign of weakness in his eyes, but there was none. At midnight, the hour when most men had already begged for release, Daniel still stood. His body shook under the chains, his voice was hoarse from speaking, and his face was pale, but his eyes did not waver. When the queen asked him one final question of the night, one that had broken many before him, his answer was quiet and firm. She asked what he valued most in life when all else was stripped away. He did not speak of power, nor of riches, nor even of glory. He spoke of truth, of keeping promises, of standing beside those who trusted him, even when the world turned against him. The hall fell into silence. There was no mocking, no laughter, no whispers. Even the nobles who hated him most could not speak. His words carried something that no one could deny. The queen stepped closer, her eyes fixed on him. For a moment, she forgot the trial, the rules, the eyes of her people. She saw not a suitor to be broken, but a man who had already proven more than anyone else before him. Still, she held her calm, reminding herself that the night was not over. The trial would continue until dawn, and only then would the truth of his endurance be known. Daniel stood beneath the golden light of the hall, the chains heavy on his shoulders, the weight of tradition pressing on him, yet his spirit unbroken. The night was far from its end, but his resolve had already changed the course of the story. The night grew deeper, and the torches along the walls flickered, as if they too were weary of the long trial. Daniel stood in the center of the hall, his shoulders still bearing the weight of the iron chains. His face showed strain, but his eyes remained calm. The nobles around him whispered again, waiting for his strength to fade, but he did not fall. Queen Eleanor, standing tall with her crown catching the light, stepped forward once more. Her voice carried through the silent hall as she declared the next part of the test. She ordered that the chains be removed, but not as a gift of rest. Instead, it was to begin another trial, one that no man had ever overcome. The servants carried forward great jars of water and placed them in a circle around Daniel. He was told to lift each jar and place them at the steps of the throne. The jars were filled to the top, heavy and cold, meant to test the body to its very limit. Daniel looked at the queen, then at the jars, and nodded without a word. He bent down, lifted the first jar, and carried it across the hall. His arms trembled, but he did not stop. One by one, he placed the jars before the throne. The nobles smirked at first, thinking it would end quickly. Yet as the line of jars grew at the queen's feet, their smirks faded into uneasy silence. The queen watched with careful eyes. She wanted to see if this man would show pride or fear, but Daniel showed neither. He carried each jar with steady determination, his breath growing heavy, his face pale with effort, but his resolve unbroken. By the time the last jar was placed before her, sweat covered his brow, and his hands were raw, yet he stood straight. The queen stepped closer, her gaze sharp, and she began to question him again. This time her words cut deeper, designed to strike at his heart. She asked if he believed he was worthy to stand by a queen, if he thought himself stronger than those who had failed before him, if he could promise loyalty when every power in the world would tempt him to betray. Daniel did not rush to answer. He took a breath and spoke slowly. He said he was not stronger than every man who had come before, but he was willing to stand even when the ground shook beneath him. He said he was not blinded by pride, but he believed that loyalty was not a gift that ended when times grew dark. His voice was quiet, yet it filled the hall like a steady flame. The queen listened, her face still calm, though inside she felt something stirring again. His words did not sound like empty promises. They felt like the truth of a man who had already lived through hardship. She found herself leaning closer, drawn to the strength that was not loud but firm, like stone that had stood against storms. The nobles grew restless. Some shouted that the trial must go on, that no man could be declared worthy before dawn. Others warned that the queen was letting her guard fall, but the queen did not turn to them. Her eyes stayed fixed on Daniel as though she wished to see into the very depths of his soul. The music of the court fell quiet, leaving only the sound of the wind outside the hall. Daniel stood alone under the weight of every eye in the room, yet he did not look away. His back was straight, his voice calm, his spirit unbroken. The queen gave him one more test for the night. She commanded him to stand in silence, to hold himself without word or motion until the last candle burned out. It was a cruel trial, for silence can weigh heavier than any chain. The hall grew still as the candles flickered, one by one. The night stretched long, and the shadows crept along the walls, and many in the court waited eagerly for him to break, to stumble, to cry out. But Daniel stood as if rooted to the ground. His body ached, his legs trembled, yet his eyes never left the queen's. Time passed slowly, the silence pressing on him, but he endured. Candle after candle died until only one remained, its flame thin and weak. When it too went out, the hall was filled with darkness. A murmur swept through the nobles, for the soldier had endured the silence and the night. Queen Eleanor looked at him through the dim glow of the rising moon outside the windows. For the first time, her lips curved into the faintest smile. The trial was not over, for dawn had not yet come. But already, the queen and her court had seen something that no one before had shown. Daniel had not broken, and with each test, his presence grew stronger, as if the night itself bent to his will. The hall was dark, lit only by the faint glow of the moon shining through the tall windows. The silence after the last candle burned out felt heavy, almost alive. Daniel stood in the center of the room, his body weary, his arms trembling from the weight of the trials he had faced, yet he did not fall. The nobles who had expected him to stumble long before now looked uneasy. Whispers moved like wind through the hall, and for the first time, doubt touched their voices. Queen Eleanor watched him closely. She had seen countless men break before midnight. Some had fallen in pride, others in fear, and many in exhaustion. But this soldier had endured chains, questions, riddles, silence, and tasks that tested both body and spirit. Still he remained. A part of her wanted to believe that this man was truly different, but another part held tightly to the tradition. No one had ever lasted till dawn, and she could not let her heart be moved to isolate. She stepped down from her throne and walked slowly toward him. The hall grew even quieter, as if the air itself waited for what she would say. She stood before him, her eyes sharp, and spoke words meant to cut deeper than any chain or trial. She asked him why he had come, why he had dared to stand before her when so many had failed. She asked if he sought power, if he dreamed of being king, if his heart was moved by the thought of ruling beside her throne. Daniel lifted his head, his voice quiet but steady. He said he did not come for power, nor for glory. He came because he believed that truth was stronger than fear, and that a promise to stand was not broken by the weight of tradition. He told her that he did not see her only as a queen, but also as a woman who carried heavy burdens. His words were simple, yet they carried something that touched even the coldest heart in the room. The nobles stirred, shocked by his boldness. Some muttered that he was foolish to speak to the queen in such a way. Others fell silent, unable to deny the strength in his honesty. The queen felt her chest tighten. His words were not like the empty speeches of princes who had tried before him. They were not filled with false promises or pride. They were plain, almost humble, but they struck her harder than any grand oath. She looked at him and for the first time saw not only a man standing in a trial, but a man who might see her beyond the crown. Still, she was not ready to yield. She declared the hardest test of all. She told him that before dawn he would face her questions one final time, not as tasks of body or riddles of loyalty, but as truths that would strip away every mask. She would demand his heart, his secrets, and his fears. The hall trembled with tension as the queen's voice filled the air. She asked him what he feared most in life. Many men would have hidden behind pride, but Daniel spoke plainly. He said he feared losing those who trusted him, that he feared breaking the word he had given, that he feared not living up to the belief of those who looked to him for strength. She asked what he desired most. Many would have spoken of crowns or riches, but Daniel said he desired peace, not for himself alone, but for those who lived under the rule of those in power. He said he wished for a life where truth and loyalty mattered more than wealth. She asked what he would do if she cast him aside, if she declared him unworthy after all he had endured. Daniel lifted his head and said he would walk away without anger, because he had not come to claim a throne but to stand in truth. The words echoed through the hall and no one could speak. Even the nobles who had waited for him to break found no laughter in their hearts. The queen stood in silence, her eyes fixed on him. Midnight passed, and still he stood. His body was worn, his voice rough, yet his spirit burned brighter than before. Queen Eleanor felt something she had never felt during a trial. She felt her walls shaking, her certainty fading. For the first time, she was not sure if the trial was meant to test him or to test herself. As the night crept closer to dawn, the queen returned to her throne, her thoughts heavy. She had tried to break him, but each trial only showed her more of his strength. Around her, the nobles whispered, waiting for the end, but in her heart. She already knew that this night was unlike any that had come before. Daniel stood, steady and unbroken, and the night that was meant to crush him had instead revealed the truth of who he was. The last hours before dawn would decide everything, yet already the queen knew that her world was beginning to change. The last hours of the night stretched slowly, and the hall seemed to hold its breath. The nobles sat restless in their seats, their eyes locked on the man who had endured everything placed before him. Daniel still stood in the center, his body weary, his shoulders heavy, but his spirit unbroken. The trial that had crushed countless men had not defeated him, and yet dawn had not come. Queen Eleanor sat on her throne, her face calm but her heart uncertain. She had expected to see another man fail, another man broken by the endless weight of tradition. Instead, she had seen strength that did not come from pride or power, but from truth and humility. She looked at Daniel and knew the final moment of the trial had arrived. The queen rose, her gown sweeping across the stone floor as she walked toward him. The sound of her steps filled the hall, and silence followed. She stopped before him and spoke, so that every soul in the room could hear. She told him that the last test would not be of chains, riddles, or silence. It would be a trial of his spirit. She would ask him questions that could not be answered with strength alone. His words would decide if he was worthy to stand beside her when dawn came. Her first question was sharp. She asked if he could still remain loyal if the world turned against her. Daniel did not hesitate. He said he would remain loyal, not because of her crown, but because of the truth in his own heart. He said loyalty was not a gift to be given and taken back, but a promise that lived even in the hardest storms. Her second question was softer, but deeper. She asked what he saw when he looked at her, not as a queen, but as a woman. Daniel met her eyes and spoke with quiet honesty. He said he saw strength, not just the strength of power, but the strength of someone who had carried the weight of many. He said he saw a heart that had guarded itself too long, and he did not wish to break it but to stand beside it. Her third question was the hardest. She asked why he thought he had endured when all others had failed. Daniel was silent for a moment, his eyes lowered. Then he spoke. He said he did not think himself stronger or wiser than others. He said he endured because he believed that giving up was a choice, and he had chosen to keep standing. The queen felt her heart tremble. His words reached her in a way no one's had before. Round them, the nobles grew silent, for even they could feel the weight of his answers. The hall seemed frozen in time as the trial reached its end. Then, as if the world itself had waited for this moment, the first light of dawn began to shine through the windows. The golden rays touched the floor, breaking the long night. Daniel still stood, his face pale with exhaustion, but his eyes steady. That he had lasted till dawn. The queen looked at him, her voice steady, though her heart was moved. She told the hall that the trial was complete, and for the first time in history, a man had endured until morning. The nobles gasped, some in disbelief, others in awe. They had seen what none thought possible. Eleanor's gaze did not leave Daniel. She stepped closer and spoke softly, not as a queen to her subject, but as a woman to the man who had changed her heart. She told him he had not only passed the trial, but also shown her the truth of what strength truly was. She admitted that she had tried to break him, but instead she had been changed. Daniel bowed his head, his voice tired but clear. He said he had only stood by what he believed, and if that was enough, then he was grateful. The hall erupted with voices, some cheering, others arguing, but none could deny what had been seen. The trial that was meant to crush men had been overcome, and the queen herself had witnessed it. As the sun rose higher, Eleanor declared before all that Daniel had earned his place, not through wealth, not through pride, but through the strength of his spirit. The nobles could not refuse her words, for the proof stood before them in the man who had endured. The queen turned once more to Daniel, and for the first time, she allowed a true smile to touch her lips. In that moment, the weight of the night lifted. The tradition had been broken, the dawn had come, and with it a new beginning. Daniel had lasted till dawn, and the story of that night would be told for generations. The trial meant to break men had instead revealed a man who could not be broken. And the queen who had tested him found herself forever changed.